Another good question from Pat Ferdinandi, who asks, what do we mean by the term holistic enterprise architecture? Well, in a very literal sense, we mean enterprise architecture of the whole as whole. And in some ways, it's a reaction or a response to the way that enterprise architecture is still being misused for things that aren't enterprise, such as the architecture of enterprise scope IT, or the architecture of the business and the organization as if it's the enterprise. So it's about the whole as whole, not just the organization, but the organization in its context, in order to understand what its context is, in order to understand how the organization can respond to it. So we look at the story of the organization, of the enterprise. We look at the structure of the organization and the enterprise. We look at the context to at least 3 layers out. So if we think of the organization as a whole, then we're looking at the transaction space that organization is in, the market space or other direct interaction space, and this broader, somewhat more fuzzy but very important area that includes families, communities, anti-clients, investors, beneficiaries, people like that, governments. That is, we might describe they're sort of indirect interactions. The other point is that we not only take it outward, we're taking it inward. Architecture is everyone's responsibility. We need to connect everyone to the story that is the enterprise, because that's what guides decision making that works, particularly at runtime, at operations, the operations level. Another aspect of this is about preventing the possession of enterprise architecture by IT alone, which is what most of the frameworks are about. The existing frameworks assume that it's always and only about IT and anything else is peripheral. This leads to an architecture that is dangerously incomplete and in some cases actively destructive. So it bundles it into a narrow constraint if we assume it's all about IT. It also means that it doesn't have authority for the enterprise architects to move around anywhere within the organization, because they're reporting at best just to the CIO, not to the whole of the executive, which is where they need to be. There's another theme as well, which is what I call really big picture enterprise architecture, sometimes shortened to the rather ugly acronym RBPEA. An architecture should be able to cover any scope, any scale, anywhere, anyone, anything. So we should be able to scale it right down to the level of a single web code, or a single line of code, but also scale it up to an entire, not just an entire organization or an entire industry, but an entire country and or even the entire planet. We check the validity of how we do architecture by how it scales, making sure that it works at each end of the extreme scales. So a holistic enterprise architecture is able to look at anything in terms of whole as whole. It's not just about the IT, it's not just about the organization, it's about the context that those operate within.